What's going on, everybody? It is Unit 7, Lesson 1. Buckle up. Alright, so this unit is a lot of fun. It's got things like questionnaires, probability, and graphing. Yeah, graphing's not that fun. So this first lesson is really simple, and it just talks about biased and unbiased questions. So a bias means that you have a bias towards something, which would make things unfair. So if you have an unbiased question or something is unbiased, that means it's fair. I'll give you an example. Would you like this old tattered up deck of pink cards, or would you like this brand new bright deck of pink cards? You get to choose. Okay, that's obviously not a fair question because I put a bias on it. The way that I phrase this question, you'd probably just pick this deck of cards unless you're crazy. So biased questions influence people to purchase things or choose things. An example of bias would be in a restaurant. You would see a menu and there's tons of bias on the menu where it's describing the burger as fresh cut beef. And really is it fresh cut? Probably not. It's kind of gross. Okay, so biased questions are unfair. So I'll give you an example of a biased question. So you'd use this on a questionnaire. So let's say you were trying to gather information for a research project or some sort of form of study. Okay, so here's a basic example to start off. Do you enjoy drinking refreshing water during the day? Is that a biased question or an unbiased question? Well, it's a biased question because of a simple word, refreshing. Why couldn't I just say, hey, do you enjoy drinking water? Yes or no? Do you like water? Yes or no? But since I added a word such as refreshing, it adds positive connotations to that sentence, to that question, and therefore it influences your answer. Because you're like, refreshing water sounds really good right now. I'll give you another example, but this one's a little bit trickier. So I want you to think about this one. Do you get a lot of sleep on school nights? Okay, so think about that. Do you get a lot of sleep on school nights? Is this a fair question or an unfair question? So if it's unfair, that means it has a bias, and we could therefore call it a biased question. Do you get a lot of sleep on school nights? This is actually a biased question. This is why it's unfair, is because we could interpret sleep in two different ways. Do you get a lot of sleep on school nights? Let's say you got 7 hours of sleep. Well, to you, that might not be enough sleep. Maybe you normally get 8, so you might answer the question totally different than I would. Do you get a lot of sleep on school nights? If I had 7 hours of sleep, and I've got a baby at home, and I like to stay up late and play video games sometimes, well, I'm gonna answer like 7 hours of sleep. Oh my goodness, that was a ton of sleep. So 7 hours of sleep could be different to two different people. So we would call that a biased question. So the whole point of this unit is how do we ask proper questions that don't have biases. So the way that we could rephrase that question would be in the form of a survey. And so we would say, hey, how many hours of sleep do you typically get on a night? And then you would have little boxes to check, like, oh, I get 1 to 2 hours, or do you get between 2 and 5 hours, or do you get between 6 and 7 hours, or 8 or more hours? And then maybe you'd have another box in there that would say other. So that would be how you would take a question and make it fair. So this lesson is all about designing questionnaires, which are basically just surveys for people to answer. And when you're making these surveys, you want them to be as fair as possible. The fact that they're fair makes it almost boring, actually. So if we were going to make another fair question and we wanted to ask people and collect some data on what their favorite type of music would be, well, obviously it would be biased if you were like, hey, do you like boring country music or fun and amazing hip hop? Well, most people are probably going to pick fun and amazing hip hop, even if they're not really sure, unless you're like a diehard country fan, which nobody should be. We could make that question fair by saying, hey, what is your favorite genre of music? And you would have a bunch of options for people to pick from. So rock, rap, techno, classical, country, and you could have one more box that says other, so people could fill in their other obscure genres of music. Okay, so that sums it up. This is literally the lesson is how do you design fair questions. But the main thing that I want you to understand from this is a bias means unfair. All right, so lock that in your brains. Bias means unfair. Okay. So that was probably the hardest lesson I've ever had to teach. So thanks for sticking with me. Hopefully you guys understand everything. Let me know if you need any help as usual. All right, until next time, keep fit, have fun.